The dust-laden wind carried a woman's scream across the prairie, cutting through the peaceful Montana sunset like a knife through butter. Nora Jenkins clutched the side of the wagon as it rumbled down the dirt road, her knuckles white with fear as three drunken men jeered and pawed at her skirts. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to end. Montana Territory, 1875. The promise of a new beginning had drawn Nora from her comfortable life in Boston following the death of her parents. A teaching position in the growing settlement of Silver Creek awaited her, along with the chance to escape the suffocating memories of everything she had lost. But as twilight descended on the endless prairie, that dream seemed to be slipping away with each passing moment. "Pretty little thing," slurred the burliest of the three men, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey as he grabbed her arm. "Too fancy for a place like this." Nora wrenched herself away, her heart hammering in her chest. "Please, I'm expected in Silver Creek. The school board, school board." The driver cackled, taking another swig from his flask. He had seemed respectable enough when she'd hired him in Billings, but she realized now how grievously she had misjudged the situation. "Ain't no school board gonna miss you tonight, miss." The wagon lurched to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwoods. This wasn't any road to Silver Creek. They had veered off course hours ago, heading into the wilderness. Nora had protested, but her concerns had been dismissed with increasingly threatening responses. "Let me go this instant," Nora demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite her terror. "I have money, already took that," the third man chimed in, patting his pocket with a grin that made her skin crawl. "But we ain't quite finished with our business arrangement." The burly man grabbed her by the waist, dragging her roughly from the wagon. Nora's feet barely touched the ground as she kicked and thrashed. Her elegant traveling dress tore at the shoulder as she fought against his grip. "Help!" she screamed, her voice echoing across the empty landscape. "Somebody help me!" The sound of hoofbeats was so faint at first that Nora thought she had imagined it, a desperate hope manifesting in her mind. But then the thunder of approaching horses grew louder, and the men's laughter faltered. "What the?" The driver squinted into the gathering darkness. A lone rider emerged from the shadows of the trees, silhouetted against the dying light. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and imposing, he approached at a steady gallop. "Let her go," the stranger commanded, his voice low and dangerous as he drew his horse to a stop a few yards from the wagon. The men hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. "Mind your own business, cowboy," the burly man snarled, still gripping Nora's arm. "This ain't your concern." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. In the fading light, Nora caught a glimpse of his face, stern, weathered by sun and wind, with piercing eyes that assessed the situation with cold calculation. "I'm making it my concern." His hand hovered near the revolver at his hip. "Last chance." The three men outnumbered him, but something in the stranger's stance, the absolute certainty with which he faced them, gave them pause. The burly man's grip on Nora's arm loosened slightly. In that moment, the stranger moved with startling speed. His fist connected with the jaw of the burly man, who staggered backward, releasing Nora. The other two rushed forward, but the stranger was ready. The fight was brief but brutal. Within moments, all three men were on the ground, groaning. The stranger turned to Nora, who stood frozen beside the wagon, her torn dress fluttering in the evening breeze. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Nora managed to shake her head, though every inch of her trembled with fear and relief. "No, I thank you." The stranger nodded once, then turned back to the men who were struggling to their feet. He grabbed the burly one by the collar, pulling him close. "It's over," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the stillness. "You and your friends get on that wagon and ride out of here. If I ever see any of you near a lady again, you won't walk away." He shoved the man toward the wagon. The three drunks, sobered by the encounter, climbed hastily aboard. The driver snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, leaving Nora alone with her rescuer. For a long moment, they stood in silence as the sound of the departing wagon faded into the distance. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of her torn dress and disheveled appearance. "I'm Lucas O'Connor," the stranger said finally, keeping a respectful distance. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles from here." "Nora Jenkins," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was headed to Silver Creek. I'm to be the new school teacher." Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "Silver Creek's a good 20 miles west of here. Those men took you off course deliberately." A chill ran through Nora that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "My belongings, they're still in the wagon." "We'll sort that out," Lucas assured her. "For now, let's get you somewhere safe. My ranch is closest. My housekeeper can see to your needs, and tomorrow I'll take you to Silver Creek myself." Nora hesitated. After what had just happened, the thought of trusting another stranger, especially a man, filled her with dread. Yet what choice did she have? Alone in the wilderness as night fell, her prospects were grim. "I appreciate your help, Mr. O'Connor," she said finally, lifting her chin. "I accept your offer." Lucas nodded, then shrugged out of his duster and offered it to her. "For your dress," he explained. Nora accepted the coat gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. It smelled of leather, horses, and pine, not unpleasant, but unmistakably masculine. Lucas led his horse over to them. "Can you ride, Miss Jenkins?" "Yes," Nora answered. Her father had insisted she learn, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback, though perhaps not as well as you might hope. A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "We'll manage." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. As they set off toward the O'Connor ranch, Nora was acutely aware of the strong arms on either side of her, holding the reins. Her heart still raced from her ordeal, but beneath the fear was a flicker of something else: gratitude, relief, and the unsettling realization that her life had just been irrevocably changed by this chance encounter. The night closed in around them as they rode in silence through the Montana wilderness, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats marking the beginning of a journey neither had anticipated. The O'Connor ranch appeared first as a cluster of warm lights in the darkness. As they drew closer, Nora made out the silhouette of a substantial log house surrounded by several outbuildings. A dog barked, announcing their arrival, and a lantern appeared on the porch. "Lucas, that you?" called a woman's voice. "It's me, Martha," Lucas responded, guiding his horse to a stop near the house. "And we have a guest." An older woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun stepped into the circle of lantern light. Her eyes widened at the sight of Nora, taking in her disheveled appearance and the man's coat draped around her shoulders. "Good heavens!" Martha exclaimed. "What happened?" "Some trouble on the road," Lucas answered, dismounting before reaching up to help Nora down. "Miss Jenkins was set upon by those drifters we heard about from town." Martha's expression hardened. "Those no-account wretches. Come inside, dear. Let's get you sorted." Nora's legs felt unsteady as her feet touched the ground. The reality of what had nearly happened, what might have happened if Lucas hadn't appeared, crashed over her in a wave. She swayed slightly, and Lucas's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "No need for thanks," he replied quietly. "Martha will take good care of you." The housekeeper led Nora into the ranch house, which was surprisingly warm and welcoming inside. A fire burned in a stone hearth, casting a golden glow over the rustic but comfortable furnishings. Lucas's sister left some clothes behind when she married and moved to California, Martha explained, guiding Nora toward a hallway. She was about your size, I'd wager. I'll find you something proper to wear. Nora was shown to a small bedroom with a brass bed covered in a handmade quilt. Martha returned with a simple blue dress, undergarments, and a basin of warm water. Get yourself cleaned up, dear. I'll have some supper waiting when you're ready. Martha paused at the door. You're safe here, you know. Lucas is a good man, best in the territory. Left alone, Nora removed Lucas's coat and her torn dress, washing away the dust and fear of the day's journey. The blue dress fit reasonably well, though it was plainer than what she was accustomed to wearing. As she pinned her dark hair back into a semblance of order, she studied her reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow, her eyes wider, more alert. The sheltered Boston upbringing felt like a distant memory now. This was the West, where danger and salvation could arrive in equal measure, often unexpectedly. When Nora emerged from the bedroom, she found Lucas and Martha sitting at a wooden table in the kitchen. Lucas stood as she entered, a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Better, he asked. Much. Thank you for the loan of the clothes. Sit and eat, Martha instructed, placing a bowl of stew in front of her. You need your strength after such an ordeal. The food was simple but delicious, and Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until she began to eat. As the meal progressed, she learned more about her rescuer. Lucas O'Connor had come to Montana 10 years earlier, building his ranch from nothing into one of the most prosperous in the area. He lived alone except for Martha, who had been with him since the beginning, and a handful of ranch hands who stayed in the bunkhouse. What brings you to Silver Creek, Miss Jenkins? Lucas asked as Martha cleared away the dishes. It's a long way from Boston. Nora hesitated, surprised that he had identified her origins so easily. Is my accent that obvious? A hint of amusement touched his eyes. That and the quality of what's left of your dress. Not many women out here wear anything so fine. I came to teach, Nora explained. After my parents passed last winter influenza, there was nothing keeping me in Boston. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in Montana territory, it seemed like a chance to start fresh. Lucas nodded, understanding in his gaze. We all came west for something. A new beginning, a second chance. And what did you come west for, Mr. O'Connor? Nora asked, curious about this man who had appeared like an avenging angel on the prairie. Something shuddered in his expression. That's a long story for another time. He stood from the table. You should rest. Tomorrow I'll take you to Silver Creek. Nora wanted to press further, intrigued by his sudden reticence, but she recognized the clear dismissal in his tone. Of course. Thank you again for your hospitality. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Nora found sleep elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt the rough hands of the drunks grabbing at her, heard their leering voices. But then her mind would drift to the moment Lucas had appeared, the certainty in his voice when he'd pulled the burly man away and said, "It's over." Those 2 words had changed everything. In the quiet darkness, Nora wondered what other changes awaited her in this wild new land. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the gentle bustle of a working ranch awakening. Nora dressed quickly in the borrowed blue dress and made her way to the kitchen, where Martha was already cooking breakfast. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you," Nora replied, unwilling to admit her restless night. "Lucas is seeing to the horses. He means to take you to Silver Creek after breakfast." Martha placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Eat up now. It's a few hours' ride." Nora had just finished her meal when Lucas entered the kitchen. He was dressed much as he had been the day before: dark trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a leather vest. His dark hair was damp, as if he'd just washed, and his face was freshly shaved. "Morning, Miss Jenkins," he greeted her. "Ready to continue your journey?" "Yes, thank you," Nora answered, rising from the table. "I'm eager to reach Silver Creek and begin my position." Martha handed Lucas a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Lunch for the road, and I've packed a few things for Miss Jenkins since those scoundrels made off with her belongings." Outside, 2 horses were saddled and waiting: Lucas's sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, gentle-looking mare. "Daisy's good-natured," Lucas assured her, helping Nora into the saddle. "She'll give you no trouble." As they rode away from the ranch, Nora glanced back at the house that had provided such unexpected sanctuary. Martha stood in the doorway, waving them off. "Your housekeeper is very kind," Nora remarked as they settled into an easy pace heading west. "Martha's more than a housekeeper," Lucas replied. "She's family, or the closest thing to it I've got out here." "You mentioned a sister last night," Lucas nodded. "Eleanor. She married a banker from San Francisco 2 years ago, visits when she can, but California's a long journey." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the vast Montana landscape stretching out around them: rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the morning breeze, stands of cottonwoods and pines dotting the horizon. And above it all, a sky so vast and blue it seemed endless. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful." Lucas glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "Takes some getting used to. The openness scares some folks who come from back east, makes them feel exposed." "I can understand that," Nora admitted. "But there's something freeing about it too, as if anything is possible." "That's the promise of the West," Lucas agreed, "though reality doesn't always live up to the promise." Nora studied his profile as he spoke, noting the lines at the corners of his eyes and the set of his jaw. There was a story there, she was certain, but she sensed he wasn't a man who shared his thoughts easily. "Tell me about Silver Creek," she said instead. "What should I expect?" Lucas guided his horse around a rocky outcropping before answering. "It's a growing town. Started as a mining settlement about 15 years ago, but when the silver played out, it could have dried up like dozens of other boom towns. Instead, it adapted. Ranching mostly, some farming in the valley. They built a proper school 3 years back. Before that, children learned in the back room of the church when the circuit preacher wasn't using it." "And the people?" Nora asked, genuinely curious about the community that would be her home. "Good folks, mostly. Hard-working. Sheriff Donovan keeps order well enough. The widow Patterson runs the boarding house where you'll likely stay, strict but fair. The mercantile is owned by the Hendersons. They carry just about anything you might need." As Lucas continued describing the town, Nora felt a growing sense of anticipation. This place, so different from the refined society of Boston, would be her new beginning. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "Do you visit Silver Creek often?" "When necessary," Lucas answered. "I'm not one for town life, prefer the quiet of the ranch." "A solitary man," Nora observed. Lucas's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Is that disapproval I hear, Miss Jenkins?" "Not at all," Nora replied quickly. "Merely an observation." The sun climbed higher in the sky as they rode, and eventually, Lucas suggested they stop to rest the horses and eat the lunch Martha had prepared. They found a spot near a small creek, the horses drinking gratefully from the clear water while Lucas spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Martha had packed bread, cheese, and cold chicken, along with 2 apples and a flask of coffee. As they ate, Nora found herself relaxing in Lucas's company. Despite his reserved manner, there was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet strength that made her feel secure. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. O'Connor?" Nora ventured as they finished their meal. Lucas looked wary but nodded. "You can ask. Why did you help me yesterday? You could have ridden past, avoided trouble entirely." The question seemed to surprise him. He considered it for a long moment before answering. "Some things a man can't ride past," he said finally. "Not if he wants to live with himself afterward." Before Nora could respond, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted their conversation. Lucas looked up at the sky, where dark clouds had begun to gather on the western horizon. "Storm's coming," he said, standing and gathering their things. "We should get moving if we want to reach Silver Creek before it hits." They mounted up and continued their journey at a quicker pace. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, and the temperature dropped noticeably. "Will we make it before the storm?" Nora asked, eyeing the increasingly threatening clouds. "It'll be close," Lucas admitted, "but there's a lined shack about a mile ahead if we need shelter." The first heavy drops of rain began to fall when they crested a hill and saw the small wooden structure Lucas had mentioned. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a boom of thunder that made Daisy shy nervously. "We'll wait it out," Lucas decided, guiding them toward the shack. "These summer storms can be fierce but usually pass quickly." They reached the lined shack just as the skies opened. Lucas helped Nora dismount and quickly led the horses to a lean-to attached to the side of the structure. By the time they ducked inside the shack, they were both soaked. The interior was sparse but dry: a small iron stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. Lucas immediately set about lighting the stove. "There are some blankets in that trunk," he told Nora, nodding toward a wooden chest beneath the single window. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch cold." Nora hesitated, clutching her arms around herself as she shivered. There's nowhere to change." Lucas looked around the one-room shack, understanding dawning on his face. "I'll tend to the horses," he said, heading back toward the door. "Take whatever time you need." Once alone, Nora quickly stripped off her sodden dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in one of the rough wool blankets from the trunk. She spread her wet clothes near the stove, which was now giving off a welcome heat. When Lucas returned, he was equally drenched. He stopped short at the sight of Nora in nothing but a blanket, her damp hair falling loose around her shoulders. "I apologize for the impropriety of the situation," he said stiffly, water dripping from his hat onto the wooden floor. "You need to get dry as well," Nora pointed out, practical despite her embarrassment. "I can turn my back." Lucas nodded, and Nora faced the wall while she heard the rustling of clothing behind her. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat. "It's safe to turn around." Lucas had removed his wet shirt and vest, but kept his trousers on, though they too were soaked. He draped a blanket over his shoulders, revealing a torso marked by old scars, a testament to a hard life. "The storm's settling in," he said, moving to the window. "Might be a while before we can continue." Nora joined him, careful to keep her blanket securely wrapped around her. Outside, rain lashed against the glass, and lightning illuminated the darkened landscape in brief, electric flashes. "At least we're dry," she offered. "And safe." Lucas glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Yes, there's that." They sat at the small table, the awkwardness of their situation hanging between them as the storm raged outside. Lucas found a deck of cards on one of the shelves and offered to teach Nora a game to pass the time. As they played, their initial discomfort gradually eased. Nora found herself laughing at Lucas's dry observations about life on the ranch, and he seemed genuinely interested in her stories of Boston. "You must miss it," he remarked as he shuffled the cards for another round. The theaters, the libraries, proper society. Some aspects, Nora admitted, but Boston held too many memories after my parents died. Every street, every building reminded me of what I'd lost. She paused, considering. Have you ever felt that way? That you needed to leave a place behind to start anew? A shadow passed over Lucas's face. Yes, he said simply, not elaborating. The intimacy of their situation alone in the small shack, half-dressed and waiting out the storm, created a strange bond between them. In this liminal space, removed from the normal constraints of society, Nora felt bold enough to press a little further. "You never told me why you came west," she reminded him gently. Lucas was silent for so long that Nora thought he would ignore the question again. But then he set down the cards and looked directly at her. "I killed a man," he said, his voice even. "In Chicago, 12 years ago." Nora's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't recoil as Lucas might have expected. Instead, she waited for him to continue. "He was my sister Alina's fiancé," Lucas explained, his eyes distant with memory. "I discovered he was already married, had a wife and children in another state. When I confronted him, he attacked me. There was a struggle and he fell, hit his head on the edge of a fireplace, died instantly." "It was an accident," Nora said softly. "Yes, but his family had influence. They wanted someone to pay." Lucas's jaw tightened. "I was cleared of charges eventually, but the scandal ruined my reputation, cost me my position at the bank." Alina was devastated both by her fiancé's betrayal and the aftermath. "So you came west," Nora concluded. Lucas nodded. "Started over, built something from nothing." He looked around the simple shack. "It's not much compared to what I had in Chicago, but it's mine. Honest work, honest living." "I think it's remarkable," Nora said sincerely. "What you've built, who you've become." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening around the eyes, a vulnerability he quickly masked by gathering up the cards. "Your clothes should be dry soon," he said, changing the subject. "The rain's letting up too." Nora glanced out the window, where the storm was indeed abating, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds. She felt a curious mix of relief and disappointment. Their time in this strange, suspended moment was coming to an end. Once their clothes had dried enough to be wearable, they dressed, taking turns facing away from each other, in a dance of modesty that seemed almost comical after the intimacies they had shared. Yet as they prepared to continue their journey, Nora sensed that something fundamental had changed between them. They rode the remaining distance to Silver Creek in companionable silence, the landscape washed clean by the rain, wildflowers nodding their bright heads in the aftermath of the storm. By late afternoon, the town appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings stretched along a main street, smoke rising from chimneys, the white steeple of a church rising above the other structures. As they rode down the main street, Nora felt curious eyes upon them. A woman in a rain-dampened blue dress riding alongside Lucas O'Connor was apparently a sight of interest. "The schoolhouse is at the end of town," Lucas told her, pointing to a red building set apart from the others. "And that's the boarding house next to it." They dismounted in front of a two-story structure with a wide porch and neatly painted shutters. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, Lucas O'Connor," she called. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town today." "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson," Lucas greeted her, removing his hat. "I've brought your new boarder, Miss Nora Jenkins." The woman's eyes widened. "The school teacher, but we weren't expecting you until tomorrow on the stage from Billings." "There was a change of plans," Lucas explained, keeping the details vague. "Miss Jenkins needed to arrive a day early." Mrs. Patterson hurried down the steps to greet Nora. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Jenkins. We're so pleased you've come to teach our children." "Thank you for your welcome," Nora replied, already warming to the woman's motherly demeanor. "Unfortunately, Miss Jenkins's belongings were lost during her journey," Lucas added. "She'll need to replace some essentials." Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Oh, you poor dear, don't you worry, we'll get you sorted out. The mercantile is still open, and I have plenty of spare necessities you can borrow until you're properly outfitted." As Mrs. Patterson continued to fuss, Lucas secured Daisy to the hitching post. "I'll leave you in good hands, Miss Jenkins," he said, preparing to depart. Nora turned to him, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Mr. O'Connor, Lucas, how can I ever thank you properly?" "No thanks needed," he assured her, mounting his horse. "I'm glad you arrived safely." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, send word to the ranch. Martha and I would be happy to help." With a tip of his hat, Lucas turned his horse and rode back the way they had come. Nora watched him go, a strange emptiness forming in her chest as his figure grew smaller in the distance. "Come along, dear Mrs. Patterson urged, guiding her toward the boarding house. "Let's get you settled in. You can tell me all about your journey over supper." As Nora followed her new landlady into what would be her home for the foreseeable future, she couldn't help glancing back one more time. Lucas had disappeared from sight, but the memory of their brief, intense time together lingered like the scent of rain after a storm. The following weeks passed in a whirl of activity as Nora settled into her role as Silver Creek schoolteacher. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, eager to make a good impression on the educated Easterner who had come to teach their children. The school itself was modest, but well-maintained, a single large room with rows of desks, a pot-bellied stove for heating, and a small desk for the teacher. 27 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 attended daily, their eagerness to learn both touching and challenging for Nora, who was determined to give them the best education possible despite limited resources. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house provided comfortable accommodations, and the widow herself proved to be a fount of information about the town and its inhabitants. Through her, Nora learned more about Lucas O'Connor. "He keeps to himself mostly," Mrs. Patterson explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "Has ever since he arrived 10 years back. Bought that land when nobody thought it worth having, worked day and night to build it up. Now it's one of the finest spreads in the territory." "He mentioned a sister in California," Nora remarked, trying to sound casual. "Eleanor, yes, lovely girl, visits every couple of years." Mrs. Patterson rocked gently in her chair. "Some thought Lucas might marry Beth Henderson, the mercantile owner's daughter, a few years back, but nothing came of it." Nora felt an unexpected twinge at this information. "Oh, they were courting, not officially, but they were often seen together for a time." Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. "Curious about our Mr. O'Connor, are we?" Nora felt herself blush. "He saved me from a terrible situation. It's natural to be interested in one's benefactor." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Patterson agreed, though her expression suggested she suspected there was more to it. Truth be told, Nora had thought of Lucas often in the weeks since their parting. She found herself scanning the streets whenever she went into town, hoping for a glimpse of him. But Lucas, true to his reputation, rarely came to Silver Creek. One Saturday morning in late September, Nora was shopping at the mercantile when she finally saw him again. He was at the counter, speaking with Mr. Henderson about an order of supplies. Nora's heart skipped at the sight of his broad shoulders and familiar stance. "Miss Jenkins," he greeted her, noticing her presence. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, conscious of Mr. Henderson's interested gaze. "The townspeople have been most welcoming." Lucas nodded. "I've heard good things about your teaching. Mrs. Miller says her boy Nathan is finally taking an interest in his studies." "Nathan has a gift for mathematics," Nora explained, pleased that Lucas had heard positive reports. "He just needed some encouragement." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Lucas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking as if he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. "Well, I should finish my shopping," Nora said finally. "It was good to see you again, Mr. O'Connor." "And you, Miss Jenkins," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Good day." As he left the store, Nora felt a keen disappointment. Their encounter had been so brief, so formal, nothing like the connection they had shared during their journey to Silver Creek. "He comes to town more often these days," Mr. Henderson remarked casually as he measured out the flour Nora had requested. "Does he?" Nora asked, trying to sound merely polite. "Mm. Used to be we'd see him once a month at most. Now it's nearly every week." Mr. Henderson wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "Started right around the time our new school teacher arrived, come to think of it." Nora felt her cheeks warm as she paid for her goods. "I'm sure that's merely coincidence, Mr. Henderson," the shopkeeper smiled. "Maybe so, Miss Jenkins." Maybe so. As the weeks turned to months, Nora became a beloved fixture in Silver Creek. Her students thrived under her guidance, and she found genuine fulfillment in her work. She made friends among the townspeople, particularly with Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's wife, who was closer to her own age. Yet despite her contentment with her new life, Nora couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt whenever Lucas O'Connor's name was mentioned, or his tall figure appeared in town. They had spoken only briefly on the few occasions their paths crossed, but each encounter left Nora with the sense that there was much left unspoken between them. Winter descended on Montana with breathtaking swiftness. One morning, in early November, Nora awoke to find the world transformed. A blanket of pristine white snow covered the ground, and delicate frost patterns decorated the windows of her room at the boarding house. The children were delighted by the snow, making the schoolhouse seem even more boisterous than usual. Nora had just dismissed them for the day and was gathering her materials when the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the unexpected figure of Lucas O'Connor. "Mr. O'Connor," she said, startled by his appearance. "This is a surprise, Miss Jenkins." He removed his hat, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. School has just finished for the day." Nora gestured to the empty classroom. "What brings you to town?" Lucas stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to invite you to dinner," he said finally. "At the ranch. Martha keeps asking about you, and with the holidays approaching." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Nora's heart quickened. "That would be lovely. When?" "This Saturday, if you're free. I can send a wagon for you given the weather." "Thank you, I'd like that very much," Nora replied, trying to keep her voice even despite her excitement. Lucas nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." He put his hat back on. "I should let you finish your work. Until Saturday, then." After he left, Nora sank into her chair, a mixture of anticipation and confusion swirling within her. Was this simply a neighborly invitation, a gesture of continued goodwill after his act of rescue months before? Or could it mean something more? Saturday arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Nora spent an undue amount of time selecting her outfit, finally settling on a forest green dress with a modest lace collar that complemented her dark hair and brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Mrs. Patterson watched her preparations with barely concealed delight. It's about time Lucas O'Connor showed proper interest in a lady, she declared as she helped Nora with her hair. He's been alone too long. It's just dinner, Nora protested weakly. A friendly gesture. Of course it is, dear, Mrs. Patterson replied, not believing it for a moment. The wagon arrived promptly at 4, driven not by Lucas but by one of his ranch hands, a friendly young man named Tom who chatted easily during the journey to the O'Connor ranch. As they approached, Nora felt a strange sense of homecoming, though she had spent only a single night there months before. The house looked even more welcoming in winter, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with warm light against the snow-covered landscape. Lucas himself came out to help her from the wagon, his hand strong and steady as he assisted her down the step. "Welcome back, Miss Jenkins," he said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, suddenly shy in his presence. Martha greeted her at the door with genuine warmth, exclaiming over how well Nora looked and how pleased she was to see her again. The interior of the house was much as Nora remembered, though now decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the approaching Christmas season. "Dinner's nearly ready," Martha announced, taking Nora's coat. "Lucas, show Miss Jenkins to the sitting room while I finish up." The sitting room was cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth and comfortable furnishings arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that made Nora itching to explore them. "You have quite a library," she commented, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "My one indulgence," Lucas admitted. "Books are hard to come by out here, but whenever I make the trip to Helena or Billings, I try to bring back a few." "May I?" Nora asked, pulling out a volume of Tennyson's poems. "Please," Lucas encouraged her. "You'll find my tastes rather eclectic." As they discussed literature while waiting for dinner, Nora discovered yet another layer to the complex man before her. Lucas was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from Shakespeare to contemporary American writers. His formal education might have ended earlier than hers, but his mind was sharp and curious. Dinner was a delightful affair: roast venison, winter vegetables from the root cellar, freshly baked bread, and an apple pie for dessert. Martha joined them at the table, her presence easing any awkwardness that might have arisen. "How are your students faring with winter setting in?" Lucas asked as they ate. "Well enough, though attendance drops when the weather is particularly harsh," Nora answered. "Some of the farm children have quite a distance to travel." "I've been thinking about that," Lucas said, setting down his fork. "There might be a way to arrange transportation for those who live furthest out." They spent the next hour discussing practical solutions to the challenges facing the school, with Martha occasionally chiming in with her own suggestions. Nora was touched by Lucas's genuine interest in helping the community, especially the children. After dinner, Martha insisted on clearing up alone, practically shooing Lucas and Nora back to the sitting room. An awkward silence fell between them once they were alone. "Would you like to see the ranch properly?" Lucas offered suddenly. "Not now, of course it's dark. But perhaps you could return when the weather is milder. In the spring, maybe." "I'd like that very much," Nora replied, warmed by the thought that he wanted her to visit again. Lucas moved to add another log to the fire. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, his back to her as he arranged the wood. "How are you managing without your belongings? I know you lost everything when those men took your wagon." "I've managed to replace the necessities," Nora assured him. "Though I do miss some of my books and my mother's locket," she smiled ruefully. "But material things can be replaced. I'm grateful that's all I lost that day." Lucas turned to face her, his expression serious. "I should have gone after them, retrieved your things." "No," Nora said firmly. You did exactly what was needed. You kept me safe." Something shifted in Lucas's gaze, a softening, a warmth that made Nora's breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might step closer, might say something to acknowledge the connection that seemed to be growing between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and moved back to his chair. "The school Christmas pageant is next week," Nora said, changing the subject to ease the tension. "The children have been practicing diligently. You'd be welcome to attend." "I'm not much for social gatherings," Lucas demurred. "The children would be disappointed," Nora pressed gently. "They've heard the story of how you rescued their teacher. You're something of a hero to them." Lucas looked uncomfortable at the description. "Hardly a hero." "You were to me," Nora said softly. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to voice. The evening ended all too soon, with Lucas driving Nora back to town himself, despite her protests that one of his ranch hands could have managed. The wagon ride through the clear, cold night was magical, stars blazing overhead in the vast Montana sky, the only sound the creak of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves on the packed snow. "Thank you for coming," Lucas said as they neared Silver Creek. "It meant a lot to Martha." "And to you," Nora couldn't stop herself from asking. Lucas's hands tightened on the reins. "Yes," he said simply. "To me as well." When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Nora looked up at him, her heart pounding, wondering if this might be the moment he would kiss her. Instead, Lucas stepped back, releasing her. "Good night, Miss Jenkins." "Good night, Mr. O'Connor," she replied, unable to hide her disappointment. As she watched him drive away, Nora resolved that she would not wait forever for Lucas O'Connor to acknowledge what was growing between them. If he could not find the courage to pursue her, perhaps she would need to be bold enough for both of them. The Christmas pageant was a resounding success, with the entire town turning out to watch the children perform the nativity story and sing carols in the decorated schoolhouse. Nora stood proudly at the back of the room, watching her students shine in their moment of glory. To her surprise and delight, Lucas appeared just as the performance was beginning, slipping quietly into the back row. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and Nora felt a rush of pleasure at his presence. After the pageant, as parents collected their children and townspeople mingled, enjoying the refreshments provided by the ladies' auxiliary, Lucas made his way to Nora's side. "They did well," he commented, nodding toward the children. "You've taught them more than just reading and ciphering." "Thank you for coming," Nora said warmly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I found I couldn't stay away," Lucas admitted, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Before Nora could respond, they were interrupted by Sheriff Donovan, a burly man with an impressive mustache who clapped Lucas on the shoulder. "O'Connor, rare sight, seeing you at a town function," the sheriff remarked good-naturedly. "Miss Jenkins must be a powerful, persuasive teacher." Lucas smiled tightly. "She is indeed, Sheriff." The conversation shifted to town matters, with more people joining their circle. Nora watched as Lucas grew increasingly uncomfortable with the attention, his responses becoming shorter, his posture more rigid. "If you'll excuse me," he said finally, "I should head back to the ranch before the weather turns." Nora felt a surge of disappointment. "But the weather is clear tonight," she pointed out. "Best not to take chances," Lucas replied, already edging toward the door. "Good night, Miss Jenkins." "Sheriff, ladies, gentlemen." And then he was gone, leaving Nora to wonder what had prompted his abrupt departure. "Don't take it personally," Sheriff Donovan advised her, noticing her crestfallen expression. "Lucas has always been that way, skittish around crowds." Something to do with his past, I expect, though he's never spoken of it to me." Nora nodded, remembering what Lucas had told her about the incident in Chicago. Of course, a man who had fled scandal would be wary of public attention, of being the center of conversation. She had been insensitive to press him to attend such a gathering. The holidays passed in a flurry of social engagements and school activities. Nora received a package from the O'Connor Ranch on Christmas Eve, a beautifully bound copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice with a simple note. "For your new collection. L.O." She treasured the gift, reading it by lamplight in her room at the boarding house, imagining Lucas selecting it specially for her. January brought harsh weather that often made travel between the outlying ranches and town difficult or impossible. Nora did not see Lucas for several weeks, though she heard news of him through others, how he had helped the Wilsons when their roof collapsed under the weight of snow, how his ranch hands had rescued stranded travelers during a particularly vicious blizzard. By February, cabin fever had set in among the townspeople of Silver Creek. To lift spirits, Sarah Miller proposed a Valentine's Day dance at the town hall. "Nothing elaborate," she assured Nora as they walked from the school to the Mercantile one afternoon. "Just music, some refreshments, a chance for everyone to socialize after being cooped up all winter." "It sounds lovely," Nora agreed. "Do you think many will attend?" "The whole town, most likely," Sarah replied. "Even some of the ranchers might make the effort." Speaking of which, she glanced sideways at Nora. "Do you think your Mr. O'Connor might come?" "He's hardly my Mr. O'Connor," Nora protested, though she couldn't prevent the blush that rose to her cheeks. "No." "Then why does he look at you the way my Jacob looked at me before he finally got up the courage to propose?" Sarah teased. "You're imagining things," Nora insisted, though her heart quickened at the suggestion. "We'll see," Sarah said with a knowing smile. "I'll make sure he receives an invitation." The day of the dance arrived, crisp and clear. Nora spent the afternoon helping decorate the town hall, hanging paper hearts and streamers, arranging tables for refreshments, and setting up chairs along the walls for those who preferred watching to dancing. By evening, the hall was transformed warm with lamplight, festive with decorations, and filled with the citizens of Silver Creek in their finest attire. Nora wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that she had saved from her Boston days, with her mother's cameo brooch at the throat. As the local musicians struck up a lively tune and couples took to the floor, Nora found herself surrounded by admirers. Several of the town's eligible bachelors asked her to dance, and she accepted graciously, enjoying the music and movement while trying not to glance too obviously toward the door. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Lucas arrived. Nora, in the middle of a reel with the young doctor who had recently set up practice in town, almost missed a step when she saw him enter. Lucas stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found her. When the dance ended, Nora made her way toward him, weaving through the crowd with her heart pounding in her chest. "You came," she said when she reached him, unable to hide her pleasure. "I received an invitation," Lucas replied, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire, a dark suit that fit him well despite its obvious age. "I thought it would be impolite to refuse." "I'm glad you didn't refuse," Nora told him honestly. Lucas's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You look beautiful, Nora." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a thrill through her. "Thank you, Lucas." The musicians began another tune, this one slower and more romantic. Lucas hesitated, then held out his hand. "Would you dance with me?" "I'd be honored," Nora replied, placing her hand in his. As they moved onto the dance floor, Nora was aware of curious glances and whispered comments from the townspeople. Lucas O'Connor, dancing with the schoolteacher, was apparently a matter of great interest to the citizens of Silver Creek. Lucas's hand was warm against her back as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. He was a surprisingly good dancer, moving with a natural grace that belied his usual reserve. "You dance well," Nora commented, looking up at him. "My mother insisted on lessons," Lucas explained. "Said no son of hers would shame her at social functions." A shadow crossed his face. "She'd be disappointed to know how seldom I've used those lessons since coming west." "Then I'm honored to be the beneficiary of your training," Nora said lightly, trying to ease his melancholy. Lucas's lips quirked in a half-smile. "The pleasure is mine, I assure you." They danced in silence for a moment, the music swelling around them. Nora was acutely conscious of Lucas's proximity, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of soap and pine that seemed to cling to him. "I've missed our conversations," she admitted finally. "Since that night at your ranch." Lucas's hand tightened slightly at her waist, "as have I." "Then why have you stayed away?" Nora asked, emboldened by the moment. The music ended before Lucas could answer, and couples around them began to applaud the musicians. Lucas led Nora to the edge of the dance floor, his expression troubled. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "It's rather warm in here." Though the February night was cold, the air felt refreshing after the heat of the crowded hall. Lucas offered Nora his coat, which she accepted gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders as they strolled along Silver Creek's main street. "You asked why I've stayed away," Lucas said finally. "The truth is, I'm not sure what I have to offer someone like you." "Someone like me," Nora echoed, confused, educated, cultured, used to the refinements of city life. Lucas's voice was matter of fact. "I'm a rancher, Nora. My hands are rough, my ways simple. I can't give you the kind of life you had in Boston." "I left Boston precisely because I didn't want that life anymore," Nora pointed out. "I chose to come west. For adventure, perhaps, for a change." Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "But eventually, you might want to return to civilization." Nora felt a surge of frustration. "You presume to know my mind better than I do myself." "I'm merely being realistic," Lucas insisted. "There's a considerable distance between us in terms of background, education, is there?" Nora challenged him. "The man who quotes Tennyson from memory and has opinions on Dickens and Hawthorne. The man who built a successful ranch from nothing through intelligence and determination. I see no great distance there." Lucas looked taken aback by her vehemence. "You make me sound better than I am." "Or perhaps you make yourself sound worse," Nora countered. "Lucas, what are you really afraid of?" The question hung between them in the cold night air. Lucas's expression flickered with a myriad of emotions: vulnerability, longing, fear, and something deeper that made Nora's heart race. "I'm afraid of wanting something I can't have," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of reaching for it and discovering it was never within my grasp." Nora stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the winter chill. "What if it is within your grasp?" she asked softly. "What if all you need to do is reach out?" For a moment, time seemed suspended. Then, slowly, Lucas raised his hand to her face, his fingers gentle as they brushed against her cheek. Nora leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Nora," he murmured, and the way he said her name was like a caress. Then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Nora felt as if she were melting into him, every barrier between them dissolving in the heat of their embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since that day in the line shack," he admitted. Nora smiled, her heart full. "So have I." They might have stood there all night, lost in each other, if a burst of laughter from the town hall hadn't reminded them of their surroundings. Reluctantly, they stepped apart, though Lucas kept hold of her hand. "We should return," Nora said regretfully. "People will talk." "Let them," Lucas replied with unexpected boldness. Then, more soberly, "But you're right. I wouldn't want to compromise your reputation." As they walked back toward the dance, their fingers intertwined, Nora felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. Whatever lay ahead for them, whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Nora's life. Lucas began courting her openly, much to the delight of Mrs. Patterson and the general approval of the townspeople. He would ride into town several times a week, sometimes just to walk Nora home from school, other times to take her for drives in his wagon or on horseback rides through the countryside. As winter gradually gave way to spring, Nora spent more time at the O'Connor ranch, getting to know its rhythms and routines. Martha, clearly thrilled by the development in Lucas's life, welcomed Nora as if she were already family. "He smiles now," Martha confided one afternoon as she and Nora prepared dinner while Lucas tended to a matter in the barn. "For 10 years, that boy barely cracked a smile, and now I catch him grinning for no reason at all." Nora blushed, pleased by the observation. "He makes me happy, too." "I can see that clear as day," Martha said approvingly. "You both deserve it after what you've been through." As the days lengthened and the snow melted, revealing the first tentative green shoots of spring, Nora and Lucas's relationship deepened. They spoke of the future cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Lucas talked of expanding the ranch, building a larger house. Nora shared her ideas for improving the school, perhaps even starting a small library for the town. One warm evening in early May, they rode to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and rose, turning the distant mountains purple against the sky. They dismounted, and Lucas spread a blanket on the new grass for them to sit upon. "It's beautiful," Nora said, gazing out at the vista before them. "I never tire of this view." "Nor I," Lucas agreed, though when she turned to him, she found him looking not at the landscape but at her. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Nora," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "I've been thinking," a distant shout interrupted him. They both turned to see a rider approaching at a gallop from the direction of town. Lucas stood, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern as he recognized Tom, one of his ranch hands. "Boss," Tom called as he drew near. "Sheriff sent me to find you. There's trouble in town." "What kind of trouble?" Lucas demanded. Tom reined in his horse, breathing hard from the ride. "Those drifters from last fall, the ones who attacked Miss Jenkins. They're back, causing a ruckus at the saloon. Sheriff thought you'd want to know." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. The memory of rough hands dragging her from the wagon, of leering faces and whiskey-soaked breath, came flooding back. Lucas's expression hardened. "Get back to the ranch," he instructed Tom. "Tell Martha what's happening, and make sure the men are armed and ready if needed." "Yes, boss," Tom nodded, wheeling his horse around. Lucas turned to Nora, his face grim. "I'll take you back to the ranch. You'll be safe there with Martha and the hands." "No," Nora said firmly, despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm coming with you." "Nora, these men are dangerous. I know exactly how dangerous they are," she interrupted. "That's why I need to see this through. I need to see them face justice." Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me," he said as they mounted their horses. "And if there's trouble, you do exactly as I say." They rode hard for town, the peaceful evening shattered by the urgency of their mission. As they approached Silver Creek, they could hear the commotion before they saw it shouting. breaking glass, the occasional gunshot. Main Street was in chaos. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, where Sheriff Donovan and two deputies were facing off against a group of rough-looking men. With a jolt of recognition, Nora identified the three who had attacked her: the burly man, the driver, and the third accomplice. "Stay here," Lucas ordered as they dismounted at the edge of the crowd. To Nora's surprise, he didn't head straight for the confrontation. Instead, he pulled her into the shadow of the mercantile building. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, his voice low and urgent. "If this goes badly, I want you to go to Martha. She knows what to do." "What are you planning?" Nora asked, alarmed by his tone. Lucas's expression was grim. "Justice, one way or another." Before she could protest, he was moving through the crowd toward the standoff. Nora followed at a distance, her heart in her throat. "O'Connor," Sheriff Donovan acknowledged as Lucas approached. "Thought you'd show up. What's the situation?" Lucas asked, his eyes fixed on the three men who had attacked Nora. "These gentlemen claim they're just passing through," the sheriff explained. "Got a bit rowdy in the saloon, broke some furniture. When I tried to settle things down, they decided to escalate matters." The burly man sneered, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. "Ain't nothing to settle, Sheriff. We paid for our drinks. And the table you broke, the mirror you shattered," Sheriff Donovan countered. "You owe restitution for those damages." "We don't owe nothing to nobody in this backwater town," the driver spat. Lucas stepped forward, his posture deceptively casual. "You owe more than you know." The three men turned their attention to him, recognition dawning on their faces. "Well, look who it is," the burly man said, his lips curling in an ugly smile. "The hero Cowboy who spoiled our fun last year." "You remember me," Lucas observed. "Good. Then you'll remember what I told you that day." The burly man's smile faded. "You threatening me, Cowboy?" "Not threatening," Lucas replied evenly. "Promising." The tension in the air was palpable. Nora watched from the edge of the crowd, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Then, suddenly, the third man, the quietest of the three, spotted her. "Hey, boys," he called, pointing. "Look who else is here. The schoolmarm herself." All eyes turned to Nora, who straightened her spine and stepped forward, refusing to cower. "Miss Jenkins," Sheriff Donovan said, surprised, "you shouldn't be here." "I have every right to be here, Sheriff," Nora replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "These men attacked me last fall, dragged me from a wagon with the intention of," she faltered, then continued. "They stole my belongings and would have done worse if Mr. O'Connor hadn't intervened." A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff's expression hardened as he turned back to the three men. "Is that so?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Sounds like assault, attempted rape, and theft to me. Serious charges, gentlemen." The burly man's face contorted with rage. "She's lying. We were just having a bit of fun enough." Lucas's voice cut through the night like a whip. "You dragged her from that wagon, I saw it with my own eyes, and now you'll answer for it." "To who?" "You." The burly man sneered, his hand moving to his gun. "I don't think so." What happened next unfolded so quickly that Nora could barely follow it. The burly man drew his gun, but Lucas was faster. A shot rang out and the man crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The other two reached for their weapons, only to find themselves covered by the sheriff and his deputies. "Don't," Sheriff Donovan advised them coldly, "unless you want to join your friend." The fight went out of them instantly. As the deputies moved in to disarm and restrain the men, the sheriff turned to Lucas. "Nice shot," he commented. "Winged him clean without killing him." "Wasn't trying to kill him," Lucas replied, holstering his gun. "Just wanted to make sure he stood trial." The sheriff nodded approvingly, then addressed the assembled townspeople. "Show's over, folks. We'll be locking these men up until the circuit judge arrives next week." As the crowd began to disperse, Lucas made his way to Nora, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she assured him, though she was trembling slightly from the tension of the confrontation. "I'm glad they've been caught, glad they'll face justice." Lucas's expression softened as he looked at her. "You were brave to come forward." "I learned from the best," she replied, managing a small smile. As they walked toward their horses, the burly man, now being led away by one of the deputies, called out to them. "This ain't over, Cowboy," he shouted. "Not by a long shot." Lucas turned, his expression implacable. "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "It is." In that moment, watching Lucas face down the man who had tried to harm her, Nora felt the last shadows of fear lifting from her heart. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The circuit judge arrived in Silver Creek the following week. The trial was brief but thorough, with Nora testifying about the attack and Lucas corroborating her account. The three men, faced with overwhelming evidence and the unified testimony of respected citizens, were convicted of assault, attempted rape, and theft. 10 years hard labor, the judge pronounced, his gavel falling with a decisive crack. To be served at the territorial prison in Deer Lodge. As the convicted men were led away in chains, Nora felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, and she could finally put the traumatic experience behind her. Lucas was waiting for her outside the makeshift courthouse. "It's over," he said, echoing the words he had spoken that fateful day on the prairie. "Truly over." "Thanks to you," Nora replied, taking his offered arm. "No," Lucas corrected her gently. "Thanks to your courage in facing them again." They walked in companionable silence toward the schoolhouse, where Nora had dismissed her students early to attend the trial. The May afternoon was perfect warm sunshine, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers, birdsong filling the air. "I never finished what I was going to say," Lucas said suddenly. "Before we were interrupted on the hilltop." Nora's heart quickened. "What were you going to say?" Lucas stopped walking, turning to face her. "I was going to ask you to marry me." Though she had hoped for this moment, the reality of it took Nora's breath away. "Lucas, I know it hasn't been long," he continued, taking her hands in his, "and I'm not the most eloquent man. But I love you, Nora Jenkins, more than I thought possible. Will you be my wife?" Tears of joy filled Nora's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas O'Connor." His smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that belied his strength. When they finally parted, he reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Nora admired the ring, a perfect fit on her slender finger. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Lucas replied, the sincerity in his voice making her blush. They were married on a perfect June day, with the entire town of Silver Creek in attendance. The ceremony took place in the white-steepled church, which was decorated with wildflowers gathered by Nora's students. Martha, beaming with joy, stood as Nora's witness, while Sheriff Donovan stood up for Lucas. Nora wore a gown of ivory silk ordered specially from Helena, with her mother's lace veil and the cameo brooch at her throat. Lucas, handsome in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such wonder and love that it brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers in attendance. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, and the church erupted in cheers as Lucas kissed his bride. The celebration continued at the O'Connor Ranch, where tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by the women of Silver Creek, and music and dancing continued well into the night. As the newlyweds circulated among their guests, Accepting congratulations and well wishes, Nora felt a happiness so complete it seemed almost unreal. "Happy, Mrs. O'Connor," Lucas murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment on the porch, away from the festivities. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Nora replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you, husband? I have everything I could ever want," he assured her, his arms tightening around her. "And more than I deserve." "I disagree," Nora said, turning to face him. "You deserve every happiness, Lucas O'Connor, and I intend to spend my life making sure you have it." His kiss was a promise of love, of commitment, of a future built together on the foundation of that fateful day when he had pulled her away from danger and declared, "It's over." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Nora continued teaching for a time, until the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor Martha, after Lucas's sister and their dear housekeeper. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William Lucas, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's curious mind. The O'Connor ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Lucas's practical knowledge combined with Nora's education and fresh perspectives led to innovations that made their operation one of the most successful in the territory. They added new land, built the larger house Lucas had envisioned, and established a reputation for fair dealing and generosity throughout the region. Martha remained with them, now more grandmother than housekeeper to the children, who adored her stories and her cookies in equal measure. Eleanor visited from California when she could, bringing her own children to meet their cousins and marveling at the change in her once solitary brother. "I never thought I'd see you so content," she confided to Lucas during one such visit, as they watched Nora teaching the children to make daisy chains in the meadow behind the house. "She's been good for you." "The best thing that ever happened to me," Lucas agreed, his eyes never leaving his wife and children. "Though I didn't make it easy for her at first," Eleanor laughed. "You never make anything easy, brother. It's part of your charm." On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Lucas surprised Nora with a special gift, a small, ornate silver locket. "It's not your mother's," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "but I hope it might serve as a replacement for what was lost." Nora opened the locket to find miniature portraits of their children inside. "Lucas, it's perfect," she breathed, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "But how did you manage this?" "I had a photographer in Helena make the portraits when we visited last month," he explained, "and commissioned the locket specially." "I love it," Nora assured him, kissing him tenderly, "and I love you more with each passing day." "As I love you," Lucas replied, drawing her close. "My brave Boston schoolteacher who found her way west and into my heart." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From terror to triumph, from strangers to lovers to partners in all things, it had been a path neither of them could have anticipated that day on the prairie. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best," Nora replied honestly. "If those men hadn't attacked me, if you hadn't come along when you did. I thank God every day for bringing you into my life," Lucas said solemnly. "Though I wish it had been under better circumstances." Nora propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through their window. "I wouldn't change a thing," she declared. "Not one moment of our story." Lucas pulled her down for a kiss that spoke of passion undiminished by the passage of time. "Nor would I, my love," he whispered against her lips. "Nor would I." And as they came together in the intimate darkness, their love a beacon in the vast Montana night, Nora knew with absolute certainty that this man, this life, this love was exactly where she was meant to be. 15 years after that fateful day, when Lucas had rescued Nora from certain harm, the O'Connor Ranch had become one of the most respected establishments in Montana Territory. Their children were growing tall and strong. Eleanor, at 14, showed all the intelligence and determination of her mother, while William, at 12, had inherited his father's quiet strength and love for the land. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Nora sat on the wide porch of their home, a book forgotten in her lap as she watched Lucas and William working with the horses in the corral. Her heart swelled with pride and love at the sight of them together, Lucas patient and encouraging as he taught his son the skills that had been passed down to him. "Penny for your thoughts," Martha said, joining Nora on the porch with 2 cups of tea. "I was just thinking how fortunate I am," Nora replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." Martha's weathered face creased in a smile. "You both earned this happiness, child, through courage and faith and no small amount of stubbornness." Nora laughed. "Mostly stubbornness on Lucas's part." "And yours," Martha countered with a knowing look. "Don't think I've forgotten how long it took you to wear down his resistance." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a wagon coming up the long drive to the ranch house. Nora stood, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun to make out the visitors. "It's Sarah and Jacob," she said, recognizing the blacksmith and his wife. "And it looks like they've brought news." Indeed, the Millers were fairly bursting with excitement as they pulled up to the house. Sarah waved a newspaper as she climbed down from the wagon. "Have you heard?" she called. "Montana is to become a state. President Cleveland signed the proclamation yesterday." Lucas and William came from the corral to join them as Jacob handed the newspaper to Nora. The headline confirmed Sarah's announcement: "Montana achieves statehood." "Well, I'll be," Lucas murmured, reading over Nora's shoulder. "After all these years as a territory." "There's to be a celebration in Silver Creek on Saturday," Sarah continued eagerly. "The whole town is preparing." "We hoped you would help organize the festivities, Nora, since you have such a flair for these things." "Of course," Nora agreed, already thinking of possibilities. The children from the school could perform patriotic songs, and perhaps a historical tableau representing Montana's journey to statehood. As the adults discussed plans for the celebration, William tugged at his father's sleeve. "Pa, what does it mean, becoming a state? Will things change?" Lucas ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "Some things will change, son. We'll elect our own governor, have representatives in Washington. But the important things, our land, our way of life, those remain the same." Eleanor joined them, having finished her studies for the day. At 14, she was already showing interest in politics and governance, devouring newspapers and debating issues with her father and anyone else who would engage with her. "Will women be able to vote now that we're a state?" she asked, her expression earnest. The adults exchanged glances. "Not yet, sweetheart," Nora answered. "But someday, I believe you will have that right." "Then I shall work to make that day come sooner," Eleanor declared with the certainty of youth. Lucas smiled at his daughter's determination. "I don't doubt it for a moment." The statehood celebration was a resounding success. Silver Creek, now a thriving town of over 500 souls, put on its finest display. Buildings were decorated with bunting and flags, a parade wound through the main street, and speeches were given by local dignitaries. Nora's historical tableau, performed by her former students, drew enthusiastic applause. As night fell, a bonfire was lit in the town square, and music and dancing continued under the stars. Lucas, normally still reserved at public gatherings, seemed to have shed his usual reticence for the occasion, dancing not only with Nora but also with his daughter and even Martha, who protested that she was too old for such foolishness, but beamed with pleasure nonetheless. "It's a new beginning for Montana," Sheriff Donovan remarked as he joined Lucas and Nora at the edge of the dancing. The sheriff's hair had gone entirely gray, but he remained as robust as ever. "Hard to believe how much has changed since you two first met." "Some things haven't changed," Lucas observed, his arm around Nora's waist. "The land, the sky, the seasons. And some things have changed for the better," Nora added, leaning into her husband's embrace. "Much better." As the celebration wound down and families began the journey home, the O'Connors loaded their sleepy children into their wagon. William was asleep almost before they left town, but Alina remained awake, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "I'm proud to be a Montanan," she announced. "The first generation born in the state." "Technically, you were born in the territory," Lucas corrected her with amusement, "by about 15 years. Details, Pa," Alina dismissed with a wave of her hand. "The point is, we're part of something important, something historic." Nora exchanged a smile with Lucas over their daughter's head. "She gets this from you, you know," she murmured. "This sense of being part of something larger than oneself." "I think not," Lucas disagreed quietly. "That's all you, my love. Your courage, your vision." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves a lullaby that eventually sent Alina into slumber alongside her brother. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly, his voice low to avoid waking the children. "Coming west? Marrying a rancher instead of some Boston gentleman?" Nora was surprised by the question after so many years together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Even when winter seems endless, or when drought threatens the cattle, or when I'm too tired from working to be good company." "Even then," Nora assured him, taking his hand. "Lucas, you are the best decision I ever made. You and our children and this life we've built together." His grip tightened on hers, and in the moonlight she could see the emotion in his eyes. "You saved me," he said simply. "From loneliness, from the past that haunted me. You gave me a future worth living." "We saved each other," Nora corrected gently. When they reached the ranch, they carried their sleeping children to bed, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice. Martha had left a lamp burning in the kitchen, and a note saying she had retired for the night. Later, as they prepared for bed themselves, Nora found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had begun with terror and violence, but had led to a life of such profound joy and fulfillment. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I was thinking about beginnings and endings," Nora replied, leaning back against his chest. "How what seemed like the worst day of my life turned out to be the beginning of the best years I could have imagined." Lucas turned her in his arms to face him. At 45, his face was lined by years of sun and wind, his dark hair showing streaks of silver at the temples. To Nora, he was more handsome than ever. "You remember what I said to you that day?" he asked. "When I pulled you away from those men." "It's over," Nora quoted softly. "And it was the danger, the fear, but something else was just beginning. Something that will never end," Lucas promised, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Not as long as there are stars in the Montana sky." As they came together in the familiar comfort of their bed, their love as passionate and deep as it had been in the beginning, Nora knew that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of this man who had rescued her in more ways than one. Outside their window, the vast Montana night spread its starry canopy over the land they both loved, a land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to soulmates, from fear to faith, from ending to beginning. And in the perfect circle of Lucas's arms, Nora found, as she always did, the peace and purpose that had eluded her until that fateful day when a cowboy had pulled her away from danger and into a love story that would last a lifetime.